Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Let me welcome all of you to this ICS Wednesday seminar on crossing the border, Indian students studying medicine in China, hosted by the Institute of Chinese Studies. We have the print as a media partner. We are also live streaming this event on our YouTube channel. As you're aware, we have a very strong panel for the webinar. Professor Rama Baru, Professor at the Center for Social Medicine and Community Health, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and an honorary fellow with the Institute of Chinese Studies. Dr. Madhurima Nandi, fellow with the Institute of Chinese Studies, and Ms. Soumya Ashok, an independent journalist who has previously lived and worked in China and is now learning Chinese. I welcome all our panelists. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished chair, Professor N.B. Varghese, Vice Chancellor of the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, New Delhi, a renowned educationist. Professor Varghese was the founding director of the Center for Policy Research in Higher Education, New Delhi from 2013 until 2019. Previously, he was head of governance and management in education at the International Institute for Educational Planning at UNESCO Paris from 2006 to 2013. He was responsible for managing an Asian regional network, the Asian Network of Training and Research Institutions in Educational Planning. He is also the chief editor of the Journal for Educational Planning and Administration. Under his leadership, NEPA is very active, has not allowed its work and output to be cramped by COVID. Professor Varghese has led several national and international research projects and has published more than 30 books and research reports. We are indeed grateful to Professor Varghese for joining us this seminar as the chair. In fact, he is the most appropriate person we could find to preside over deliberations this afternoon. I will now invite Professor N.B. Varghese to take over as the chair and conduct the proceedings of the webinar. Professor Varghese.
Thank you, Professor Kantha, and respected Professor Rama Baru, and fellow panelist, Dr. Madhurima Nandi, I hope I am pronouncing correctly, and Dr. Soumya Ashok, and all the participants. It's indeed a great pleasure for all of us to discuss on an issue which is very important. Perhaps this is one of the most important issues that is discussed in the context of new education policy and also in the context of many of the policy dimensions, because this new policy makes a dramatic change in terms of the mobility, not of mobility of students, but mobility of institutions. For the first time in India's history, we are going to permit foreign institutions to come and establish branch campuses and offer courses and award degrees in India. So the concrete step will be taken later. Friends, when we talk about internationalization of education, we talk about mobility, and mobility mostly of four types. The programs move, like the MOOCs and other things. Then the students move, then the teachers move, and the institutions move. These are the four forms of movement or cross-border movement that you find in education. And it is very important to see that these four movements are identified as modes of trade rather than internationalization in the real sense of the term. And this comes in the context of globalization of higher education rather than internationalization of higher education. Globalization is a subset of internationalization, and it is mediated through the market processes. So therefore, it is very important to see the difference. Why I'm making this point so clearly is that although you are discussing only about one of the elements in the movement, that is student mobility, there is a lot of difference between the student mobility between two developing countries and student mobility from a developing country to a developed country. We Asians and Africans normally have a tendency to look westward. So this mobility that you're talking about is not looking westward. And you find that the logic, economic rationale, and the social composition of the people who are moving out to the west is that group of people are very, very different from the group of people who are moving to developing countries. When African students come to India or Indian students go abroad, you'll find this difference. I also like to say that when we are talking about people moving in India or in China, one thing that is common is that the logic of Chinese students going abroad is different from students coming to China to study. Similarly, the logic of rationale and logic of Indian students going abroad is very different from students from other countries coming and studying in India. So therefore, when you are talking about even China is the country which sends the largest number of students to study abroad. It counts close to 1 million today. And you find that there is a lot of difference in terms of the logic of the students who are coming. One is a more full-fledged market processes, which I call will be coming under the category of globalization of higher education, whereas the students coming to the developing countries, especially in India or China, this inward mobility is less of a market processes because there are fellowships that are given. So it is not based on the market rationality. There are other forms of rationality that are dominating this. So from that point of view, it is very important that, we discuss this issue and also try to see the empirical evidence that you have generated, very, very well generated. I had a chance to go through the paper that you had written. And since I am from NEPA, we are also indirectly responsible for carrying out and helping and supporting the conduct of the study. So I had a special interest in reading that, not only now, even when Professor Rema submitted that as a report to NEPA, So but I do not have any intention to preempt your presentation. So I will not go further. I have some comments on generally about the student mobility and especially the route or the modes of mobility and the particular features of mobility between India and China. And I'll come to it. I am given 10 minutes after your presentation. That is what I was told. So I will, when I come to that stage, I will reflect on what your presentation and also some of my own views on the general issue. Can I request, I was told that each of the panelists will having 10 minutes each.
Yes.
I think Professor Rema was already introduced. Perhaps Dr. Madhurima Nandi is a fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies. I also thank Chinese Studies for providing this opportunity to organize this webinar. And she completed her PhD on public health and from the Center for Social Medicine and Community Health in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her areas of interest include health service systems, health policies, comparative health systems, and inequalities in the provision of health services in India. She has several publications. I am not getting into the details. So you are an authority, a budding authority in the area. And let me take this opportunity to welcome you. Soumya, welcome you. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you also. She's an independent journalist based in Chennai. Day before yesterday, I was having a lecture on new education policy with the Madras Management Association, I think, MMA, Madras Management Association. It's a very largely attended meeting. She has been previously reporting from Beijing and Delhi, the Indian Express, and many other publications. And she has a degree from Columbia University on journalism and also MA in political science and global affairs. And she is a very articulate, budding journalist. And after 10 years, if you get a chance to see her, she will be in a very, very high pedestal than what she is now, So let me take this opportunity to welcome you too. Friends, we have an excellent panel and who are very, very specialized in the area that they are talking about. And not only that, their presentation will be based on an empirical study, a detailed empirical study, and an analytical piece that they have brought out. So now let me say that let us start with these 10 minutes for each of the panelists. Let me start with the Professor Rema. It is your time, madam.
I'll go first.
The first
Oh,
presentation.
you want to go?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So,
Thank you.
Madhuri,
Thank you.
please.
Share a slide. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Professor Varghese for agreeing to chair the session, and also the comments that he gave in the beginning itself. It in fact reflects what we will be speaking today, and the findings from our particular study. It's kind of a case in point as to what's happening to professional higher education with taking this case study forward. I just want to give a little background to the study that we did. This was conducted by Professor Baru and me over the last 2 years. We conducted the field work in May and June 2019, and the cities that the students and the faculty were from these cities: Beijing, Shanghai, Wuhan, and Shenyang. We conducted in-depth interviews and group discussions with the students, faculty of the medical colleges, and officials in the Ministry of Education, CRC. So we would also like to thank all of our key informants who had been part of the study. We also like to acknowledge NEPA's support for this. We start with where do students go? As we have put these slides as in a question form. So the first thing that we are going to see is I give the overview. So where do these students go, and when did this phenomena gain momentum? So over the last 2 decades, there has been an increase in mobility of Indian students for higher education abroad, and especially we see this in the professional higher education. This phenomena actually becomes interesting when we see the mobility of students going to study medicine abroad. Specifically, if we see for undergraduate courses in medicine, more than 10,000 students go abroad every year to study medicine at the undergraduate level. And the major destinations are Ukraine, Philippines, Russia, Nepal, mostly the Asian countries: China, Kyrgyzstan, Poland, Bangladesh, Belarus, Kazakhstan. So Asian and the East European countries are dominant destinations. Others also include the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and Germany. Now, there's no data that we could come across giving the division of how many students are going to each of these countries, but we do get an estimate by the number of colleges in each of these institutions, and they accepting the international students into their medical colleges. So Indian students traveling to China for higher education actually started with the bilateral agreements on higher education, which was signed by the former Prime Minister Vajpayee's government when he visited China in 2003. So there were several bilateral agreements that were signed on higher education. And the first batch of students who actually go to China to study medicine is in 2004, which was around 150 students. These students went through agents who were selected by the embassy and consulates in India. It gained momentum over the years, and till last year, we had a count of about 22,000 students who were in China studying medicine, Indian students studying medicine. So why do these students go abroad? So I keep this in the terms of demand and supply, actually. So in 2019, if you just go by the numbers, there were almost 14 lakh students, so more than 14 lakh students who appeared for the NEET. NEET, as you know, is the National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test, formerly known as the All India Pre-Medical Test, for gaining entry into an undergraduate course in medicine. So the number of medical seats available in 2019 was about 80,000, and those who qualified the NEET were around 7 lakhs or more. So in India, as you can see, the demand is much greater than the supply. So the seats are few, 80,000, and these are divided across private and public medical colleges, which are actually 50-50%. So you have 50 government colleges and 50% of these medical colleges, about 530 medical colleges, which are in the private sector. The government medical colleges, the fees are pretty nominal. So you actually land up paying few thousand rupees a year. But the private universities are anything from 65 lakhs to and above. This is just medical, the tuition fees for the entire course, apart from probably the capitation that these colleges might be taking, which is illegal. Within these private universities, there's a particular government quota which charges 4 lakhs for each of these seats. Now, cost of MBBS across countries and within countries that we saw vary. So I'll just give, I hope you can see the table. Yeah. So the costs are relatively lower in China, as you see, comparatively to the others. I mean, of course, I've just kept USA as a case of the Western countries. So there you have like 75 lakhs per year for 1 year of just the fees. And these are just the fees, mind you. I mean, these are not taking into account the cost of living or hostel fees and other things during their stay. So as you can see, the number of medical colleges across these countries, and I've just taken these 5 countries as an example. So Kazakhstan has 12, Russia has 54, but among these only 12 include the English language, allow the English language medical course to be taught. Others are bilingual and only Russian. Ukraine has 16, and China has recognized 45 medical colleges for international students. And all these are supposed to be teaching in English. And the USA has 44, but it's far too expensive. And India, we have 259 colleges in the private system. And most of these are pretty expensive, and you have anything from 65 lakhs and above for the entire medical course. Among the other factors of why China is what we found through our study was women consider it safer, and agents act as facilitators with their networks with specific medical universities in China. So you have agents in many of these states, dominant states from where the students go, who have their networks with one particular university in China, and they encourage students to enroll in these universities. So where in China do they go? So before 2017, you had almost more than 214 universities that were taking Indian students, and this included the bilingual and just solely the Chinese language universities. But of course, I mean, since the numbers were increasing and there was no quality control, so there were reforms brought in 2017s, and now you have 45 medical universities recognized by the Ministry of Education in China and the erstwhile Medical Council of India now, which is the National Medical Commission. And the other reform that was brought in is like only those students will be eligible who qualified the NEET exam to go to China or to go abroad for their undergraduate course in medicine. I'll just brush upon like what were the experiences of Indian students in China. So one important thing that came out in our study was that there's a different stream for international students. So they actually don't integrate these students with the Chinese medical education system where the Chinese are studying. The Chinese students enter the system through the Gaokao system, and that's kept completely separate from this. What we found was that language is a major barrier during the stay in China, and it's a major impediment to the transaction of theory and practicals. Even when in a university which states that it teaches English, even then. So the transaction of the curriculum is through PowerPoint that are often superficial and do not cover the entire curriculum. There are also limited patient interactions that students complained about because of the language firstly, and then also the patients do not like sometimes being touched by foreign students who are unable to communicate in their language. Apart from this, evaluation of each semester was also very superficial because these are mostly dependent on the PowerPoints and was based on a multiple choice question. And these were often circulated beforehand. So these are the experiences we found from students there. So overall, there is no rigor in the system. Students who are serious, they manage to make their way through self-teaching, self-disciplining themselves, and interacting with Chinese students. who are studying in the parallel stream. But largely there is no interaction with the Chinese students in the Chinese system. There are also several psychosocial stresses that the students face during this time. So first of all, adjusting to the new environment where China was never part of your imagination and they'll end up going there where language is a barrier. So it becomes quite stressful for them. There are a large number of students, wherever there are a large number of Indian students, there's a buffer. So you generally form cliques and there's less insecurity. But in a lot of other provincial universities where there are few students, a few Indian students, the stresses increase further. The academic program and its transaction, of course, requires a great deal of self-motivation and hard work, which is very difficult. I mean, it becomes very difficult for a lot of students to cope with it. And most of these students also come from very modest backgrounds, and even the lowered fee in China across the 6 years that they are there, including the internship year, is a financial burden for them and their parents. A lot of them we will see actually take loans. So during the stay in China, students get attracted to various aspects of Chinese life. They venture into different forays and small businesses sometimes to earn extra. This varies from being sub-agents to other kind of small businesses and trading and all that. Some also get jobs as English tutors, and this is how they kind of try to supplement their whatever money they get from home. College authorities in a lot of cases are strict, and they do keep tabs of the international students and monitor their activities and report to the embassy if there are any arrays and any cases of drug abuse or dropouts or missing students suddenly. So the embassy does intervene from time to time. So for most of these students, China was never part of the imagination and during the growing up years. And as with other students in India, they spend the years that they spend in new country, they're unable to make it their home at all. So many are unable to adapt to the Chinese way. So, I mean, these are just few of the anecdotes that we had come across when we were interviewing the students. My last slide was taking from what Professor Varghese also gave the larger framework. So we see an increasing markets in medical education, and that comes out quite clearly in our case study also. It would be important to actually place this phenomena in the context of globalization and increase in markets and professional education over the years. It comes out quite clearly in our case. Even though internationalization of higher education is an important aspect of foreign policy, this is largely a business proposition and a commercial activity. So what actually started as a bilateral agreement between two countries has actually become a full-blown market case. And you have actually business arrangements between individuals, suppose agents here and with medical institutions there, individuals within there who are making this phenomena work and taking students. So this also can be seen as a supply and demand kind of a thing, where you have an increasing market and you have aspirations of students and their families who demand these, who really wish to study medicine and would want to seek a seat abroad since they can't get it here. And they travel across the border to gain entry and a seat to study medicine. So, and during this whole process, we see that the students are navigating multiple actors and institutions, which is a pretty organized network of actors and institutions, whether it's here or across the border. And post-COVID, we did look up some of the sites which are placement agencies, and a lot of them have struck out China from their advertisements. So you see a whole lot of other countries in Asia and Eastern Europe, but not China is actually missing in their from their list in this particular year. So you really see, I mean, this is something we'll have to look forward to also, and wait and see how this readjustment of markets actually takes shape in the next few years. I mean, this is of course post-COVID and also depends, and also is dependent on the India-China relations and how it shapes up. I will now hand it over to Rama, and she will talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Madhurima.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you know,
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you very much for confining to the time and also highlighting some of the answers to the question, who are the people who are profiling? Who are the people who are going to China? And now the issues related to, you discuss some of the issues related to their stay or while they stay in China. But more important is that the problems that they face when they come back to India. May I request Professor Rama to continue the dialogue?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Varghese. And what I'm going to do is, based on the study we did, which was supported by NEPA, I'm going to really talk about how is this movement facilitated and what are the kinds of networks. And this was something that was very exciting when we did this study. And we found that there were formal and informal networks, agencies, actors, and institutions involved. So the questions that I'm going to pose is, what really motivates students to cross borders to study in China? Now, one of the very important things which Madhurima highlighted was the whole question of supply and demand. So the number of medical colleges available for access within India for aspiring doctors. The second is the cost of education in India. So if the public sector has limited seats, so the private sector is fairly large, but very important issue that we need to flag from the Indian side is that the quality of education is very variable in the private sector. There are no clear regulatory structures. And also the financial part of it is extremely varied. So you can have Manipal, which is at one end, but you can have a medical college in Sri Perumbudur, which is at the other end. So I think there is the question of what is the supply that's available, the cost that is incurred, and third, the quality. One of the very important things that came out from our study is that there are both individual and familial aspirations to become a doctor. And there is quite a bit that's written in the sociological literature about how becoming a doctor is status enhancing. It is seen as an upward mobility for many families. And this came out very clearly in our study. And the other very important issue is the inability to get a good score for you to qualify into a good medical college through the NEET exam. So this became a second very important issue. And of course, as I said earlier, the high cost of private medical colleges in India. And comparably, the reasonable fee structure and living costs in China compared to Western countries. What Madhurima said is very important. As children grow up in the Indian context, China is not a country we really reckon with. We know very little about its history. We know very little about its contemporary politics. It's usually the Western country that become our frames of reference. So therefore, the primary motivating factor for students to really move to China to do medicine is the economic concern, which is that fee structures are much lower in China as compared to Western countries. And as Madhurima mentioned, the safety of living in Chinese cities was an added attraction for single women, not just women, even young men said that, it's very safe to live in China. Now, the other very important question, and this came out when we started doing interviews with students, and we normally did these interviews in groups, and some we managed to do on one-on-one. Is there a regional pattern for the movement from India to China? And it was very interesting that there is a very clear regional pattern, with the majority of the students who go to China really are from the western states of Gujarat and Maharashtra, and the southern states of Tamil Nadu, erstwhile Andhra Pradesh and Kerala. So we found this a very interesting phenomenon, because if you actually look at distribution of private medical colleges in India, it is south of the Vindhyas that has the larger concentration. But when you're looking at who is going from India to China, it is students from these very states who have a surfeit of private medical colleges, but move to China because the cost is much less. And what we found is also that there is a clustering of students in some medical colleges from particular states. For example, there was a very large representation of students from Northern Kerala in Wuhan Medical University. And there was also a religious aspect to it. There were many more Muslims from Northern Kerala in Wuhan Medical University. It was much more mixed in the Capital Medical University in Beijing, where many of them actually came from Maharashtra and Gujarat. And the mix was both middle class and lower middle class. So it is not as if the upper middle class was coming into China. The upper middle class, as we know, the children of upper middle class families are going westward. But these are children of families that were largely middle and lower middle class. Next, please. Madhu? Thanks. So the next question we asked ourselves, and which came out from the study again, what is the class and gender composition of students who traveled to China? There were clearly more men than women who crossed borders to study medicine. And like I said earlier, they come from middle class families and lower middle class families. And what was very intriguing was when we interviewed these students and had these discussions, many of them were first generation learners. They did not come from the metro cities necessarily. Of course, there was a fair representation from Mumbai and Ahmedabad, but from Kerala and Tamil Nadu, they came from smaller towns. And many of them, the families sold property or they took loans to finance their children's education. Now, this had another effect, which was that this put tremendous pressure on students to live up to the expectations of the family when they return to India on completion of their studies and are unable to qualify the foreign medical graduate examination. And when we asked them, they said that even after coming to China, they didn't know the language, they didn't understand how to deal with the system. They found that the curriculum and pedagogy was not up to the mark. But then when we asked them, then why didn't you just go back? They said, no, that would be a loss of face to the family. We cannot afford to do that. So we continue to stay here, but many of them said we continue to stay unhappily. And I'm just taking a quote from an interview that we did with a student in Beijing. Sometimes you're in such a dark space. Parents know nothing about what we go through here. From my family, I'll be the first doctor. Very difficult to explain to parents the kind of mental torture I go through. My parents are very supportive, but only thing I get to hear from them is that this will pass. But it will take me time to explain to them that this will pass for now, but there is more to come. And when they talk about there is more to come, it is about their eligibility once they come back to India and have to qualify the FMGE. Next, please. Next. This is another quote which was based on an interview with the health official from the Kerala Health Department. So the families and society back home have their own aspirations and expectations for the children who return. A health official from the Kerala Health Department said that many of the students who return from China are unable to clear the foreign medical graduate examination. They're also from low middle class backgrounds. They get absorbed with low salaries from rupees 10 to 15,000 in private hospitals through some connection. The families also seek dowries for their sons who are seen as doctors with foreign training. So we found this paradox being played out, and in fact, a lot of the interviews we did, the issue of dowries kept coming back. So the doctor with foreign training, but who is not able to clear the FMGE. So there are too many contradictions and complexities that play out when they return. So the next question that we explored was what are the formal and informal networks that facilitate the movement? This intertwining between the informal and formal really results in a very complex web of relationships and reciprocities that are built in to facilitate this movement. The informal networks are mostly senior students from their hometown who are the first point of contact, motivators, and assist in providing the initial set of information and later assist in settling down when they reach China. Now, what the key players in the formal network is the agents, the sub-agents, and the agencies. They play a very critical role in mobilizing students to study medicine in China. Now, what we found very interestingly is a former student can become a sub-agent, and that sub-agent can get attached to an agent who could be a franchisee of an agency. So we found that there are certain key nodal agencies, and they are actually examples of consultants. They call themselves educational consultants agencies. So you have the Apex International in Hyderabad. You have, and I've mentioned the name of few of these in Kerala. So typically these are the large enterprises, but they have contacts with agents who act as franchisees for these Apex organizations. And they play a very important role in facilitating movement of students. One of the very important observations that our study threw up is there's actually a very thin line between formal and informal, because the agent could be a family friend, a relative, and a former student or an alumni of one of the medical colleges in China. So the entire network that is built for the market forces to facilitate the movement is very, very clear. So I'm giving you some more detail about who are the important actors and institutions that facilitate this movement. So as Madhurima mentioned earlier, each agent has a link with one particular college in China with connections and contacts. And there are sub-agents within the university who liaison between the university in India and agents in China. The agents are actually scattered all over India. The main agents are located in Delhi, Mumbai, Gujarat, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh. Their franchisees operate across these states. And according to the students, the agent's commission varies according to the ranking of the university and could range from 200,000 rupees to 500,000 per student. So you can imagine the volume of money that is being transacted through this process. The agencies and agents are the link between the Chinese university for facilitating the application, providing information about fee structure, and also arranging for living arrangements. So most students actually feel beholden to the agents, since negotiating the admission process directly with the university concerned is very difficult, and language is a barrier in this. And what agents are actually more like brokers and having specific tie-ups. They have links with the top administrative officials managing the division for international students. For instance, in the medical university in Wuhan, there are over 400 students from Kerala who had come through the same agent. The agent from Kerala directly negotiates with the agent in Wuhan University, who is actually from Nepal. Thus, the network of agents representing both sides is quite complex. And both Madhurima and I want to do a separate study on this. This came up through the study that we were doing, but I think this warrants a study in itself. Next, please.
Try to conclude. 2 minutes, take 2 more minutes.
Okay, so basically what this study showed us very, very clearly, as Dr. Varghese said right in the beginning, the class composition of those who are moving to China is very different from the class composition that moves westward. The other very important issue that comes out is the aspirational India, young India, that for whom the importance of medicine and engineering also is a way of experiencing social mobility, enhancing their own status. And the fact that many of them are first generation learners. So the kind of expectations that are placed on them is extremely high. But I think on the other side, their return to India is a very, very difficult story. And I think this is what Soumya is going to illustrate through her presentation, which is going to follow. But I think the other very important piece of the story is the lack of regulation of quality, the fact that there is no control over the role of the agents, and the disappointment that many students face with the agents that they connect with. And then because they have already invested so much money, are unable to back off. So there have been many interviews where we were told that the agents actually didn't give them full information. They didn't tell them anything about the curriculum and pedagogy. And when they landed there, they had to deal with the situation as it emerged. So I think these are some of the important issues that came up through our study. And now I think Soumya can take over. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rema, for establishing the continuity. I think two important messages that you are making, the students, when they come back, they have to appear for the examination. And if you look at the pass percentages, you find that it is very low. It is 12%, 13%, 14%, not only from China, but also from other countries, when you're coming to this. So this is a big hurdle. Even with a degree, you cannot practice, So that is something that we have as a major hurdle. A second issue also that you very rightly pointed out is that also that, the network of agents, the informal arrangements, in a sense, going abroad to United States or UK or Australia, that experience is very different from getting to Wuhan or to Peking or any other cities in China, so the arrangement, the overemphasis of the informal arrangements and agency systems and agency patterns, that are operating, it's very important, although we are talking about the market, this is a very underdeveloped, unorganized market, where you have a lot of possibilities like the local money lenders, you can make a lot of profit out of this, and there is nothing on record. That is one of the major concerns. Thank you very much for adding these dimensions to the debate. May I ask Soumya now?
Thank you so much to my fellow panelists, and thank you, Professor Verghese. It was a very generous introduction. I just wanted to touch base on who it is we talk about when we talk about these students and how do they look like. I had the fantastic opportunity, thanks to the Indian Express last year, to be posted in Beijing for 10 months. And before I left, I had a very, I think an hour or two long chat with Professor Shrikant Kondapalli from JNU, who just gave me a tip that, you should go to Tianjin someday. There are a lot of students there. Just go have a look, he said. At that stage, I obviously knew nothing about China. I knew no Chinese. I showed up, and through a network of actually Tamil students and a group of people in Beijing, I happened to make contact with somebody in Tianjin. So what I'm looking at today is 4 different aspects. I'm going to give you a face to how does a medical student look. I'm taking the example of 2 Tamil students in their 4th year in Beijing's Capital Medical University. Then I'm taking you to an internship year, which was set in a smaller town in Hebei province. And then the day of the graduation of Tianjin University, which I happened to cover last year for the Indian Express. And when they come back, what does life look like? Especially this year, because it's a pandemic year, and we are our healthcare system itself is under strain. How do they fit into this sort of picture? Madhu, can you move to the next slide? Thank you. So this is on campus, my first look at Capital Medical University, which is in Fengtai district in Beijing. I happen to know 2 students here, one named Kamlesh and the other Akash. They played cricket with another Tamil boy, so it was all a network of how they all know each other. But Kamlesh and Akash welcomed me to come visit them on a Wednesday last June. And I had to meet them outside the international wing of their university. And like we've heard already, many of this is strictly under surveillance. So you can't just walk into a Chinese university. So they've managed to somehow take me and my colleague Yan Kong, who is a fantastic Chinese photographer, through the garage and up into a side service area, up to their rooms, to show me how they live. Madhu, to the next slide, please. So one of the things that I thought was very fascinating is the list of things you cannot do. And one of those is pictured in this slide, which is a banned induction stove. You cannot actually plug in an induction stove, but of course they had to treat us to chai. So that's Kamlesh on the left making us tea. And he told me specifically, please don't publish this in the Indian Express. Secondly, there's some other things about the Chinese campuses that the students found really interesting. So one thing about Kamlesh is his uncle was an agent. So that's again the network of how agents come into play. His uncle ended up convincing him to go to China. In Akash's case, his mother wanted him to be a doctor. So essentially what happened is she ended up paying 2.5 lakhs to the agent as commission, plus an plane ticket where the agent sat next to Akash on his way to Beijing under the pretext of dropping him off, but actually it was for the agent to visit one of his own relatives. So it was a really interesting group of how they come to know. And to be honest, Akash told me he has political connections in Tamil Nadu, but he still couldn't swing a private medical seat because it was so expensive. Secondly, they come and they told me about how life feels. So one of the biggest things that they were shocked by is there was a Burger King in Beijing. They'd never seen a Burger King in Trichy, where they were from in Tamil Nadu. So they would eat burgers continuously for the first few months that they were there. Second, the fact that you can speak so freely with women, the idea that you lived in co-ed dorms, things were so different to back home. And like my colleagues had spoken about previously, all of this ran parallelly to Chinese student life. You actually could go for days without seeing anybody, any Chinese student. You lived in your own international wing. The last anecdote, which didn't get into the piece I wrote for the Express, was dissection. So they gave me these examples of what they experimented on. And one thing I found really funny was using chickpeas as a fake tumor, which they would insert into chicken feet. Chicken feet is a popular snack in China. And so this was a bit of a joke that they thought we had to extract this out of chicken feet. Madhu, to the next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So actually, in the process of reporting for this, I'm going in a bit of a, so where I went to actually, if you think of it in a linear way of my reporting, was to this small town in Hebei province called Sanzhou. Here I met a man called Manoj Sharma. He's from Kadalur district of Tamil Nadu. His name sounds North Indian, but he's actually Tamil. His parents were very good friends with a North Indian IAS officer and therefore wanted to name him after him. So his pet name is Joy. Joy picked me up from the Gaotie station, the high-speed train. It's about 200 kilometers, less than 200 kilometers from Beijing. He took me straight to this central hospital where he and 56 other international students, Indian and Sri Lankan, interned. Now, Tianjin Medical University is large enough, but the medical college couldn't accommodate all of them. So about 57 of them were sent off to this central hospital to do their internship here. To the right of this is the foreign students hostel. Unfortunately, I don't have a clear picture of it because I went at night after they were free and had time to speak. The whole floor, there were 4 floors filled with students from India and Sri Lanka, maximum from India. And Manoj Sharma, Joy as I call him, actually from here took me to his friend Julie's place. She's a Chinese realtor. He played badminton with her. So what is interesting is you go to a small town, you have to adapt, you end up meeting Chinese people, they become your friends. So one thing he did is he walked across from this hospital every day to the other side where there was a park, where senior citizens used to practice martial arts. So he became their Indian student. Second thing he did is a badminton, he became better at badminton. So 3 times a week he would play badminton with Julie. Now Julie spoke very little English, I spoke very little Chinese, but I lived with her for 3 days, which was an exceptional experience. It was also a small town. So coming from very few months in Beijing to a very small town, I felt like everyone was taking pictures of me, which was true. As a foreigner, they suddenly felt very enamored by, an Indian face. And Joy found it very funny that, he had been through the same process about a year ago when he first showed up. Can you go to the next slide, please? Madhu, next slide. Thank you. So later that day, I went to inside the foreign student hostel. And this is a typical corridor, how it looked, clothes drying, plates everywhere, spices all put together. And on the left is Sunidhi, a picture of her on her wall, which she does not like very much. And she told me not to photograph. And to the right is Mrinalini, who is studying for the foreign medical graduate exam. So what is interesting is, like we've spoken so far about the FMGE, that stands for Foreign Medical Graduate Exam, a licensing exam that every student has to write, every foreign medical graduate has to write upon their return to India. So what happens in your internship year, in your 6th year, you end up finishing two things. You finish the requirements of the Chinese medical degree, and you start studying for the FMGE. The FMGE can be taken twice, in June and December. So what Mrinalini was opting for is a quick first attempt before she graduates. So I met her in, I think, May, and she was about to fly to India in a month to write the exam before she comes back to graduate. So one of the things she was preoccupied mostly of the 6 years she lived there was she made way too many purchases of Taobao, which is the Chinese online shopping, and she had no idea how she's going to bring it all back to India. And what was funny to me also was that the agent actually messed up. She was never supposed to be in Tianjin. She was on her way to Nanjing, but somehow one day at 10 p.m. at night, she showed up at Tianjin, and that became her life for the next 6 years. Next slide. So this is just some walkabout in Sanjo with Joy, him practicing martial arts on the right, and the famous lion in that town. Again, often we were both stopped by many Chinese people asking if they can take photographs with us, and little kids were asked to come to us and practice their English. This was also, frankly, my first time in how it felt to be in a much smaller town to what I was used to in Beijing. Next slide. So then July 1st, Joy told me he's graduating. So he kept telling me not to come, but of course I went with Yan, my friend and colleague who was taking the photographs. We took again a high-speed train from Beijing. We went to Tianjin Medical University, where we interacted with a lot of parents actually. So it was held in a giant indoor badminton court, and it was like a festive environment. Parents in their best, very proud. And I happened to talk to a lot of them, where the main point was always, it's too expensive for them to study in India. I just could not afford capitation fees. I could not afford private education. So I sent them here. So these are some of the students I spoke to. Rashi Patel is second from right. She topped the university that year. And she also got 186 on 300 at the FMGE that year, even before she graduated. Next slide. Again, some other fantastic photos that Yan clicked of different groups of students. Of course, they were not just Indians. So the point to be noted is you're also studying in a South Asian environment. You have students from Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, lots and lots of Sri Lankan students in Tianjin University. Next slide.
Can you try to conclude?
Yeah, sure. So of course, everything comes together when it comes to a student population. So you've got various little ecosystems that develop. You can move forward, Madhu. And then you've got the journey back to India, which everyone's curious about. So what happens when you return? As Professor Verghese pointed out, you have this big hurdle called the Foreign Medical Graduate Exam. And the National Board of Examination 2 years ago did an assessment of how things have been between 2015 and 2018. And they found less than 12% of Indian students who obtained a Chinese medical degree actually cleared the FMGE. So these are very, very small numbers to the number of students who actually take the exam. And you can find people, there is no limit to taking the exam like you have for the IAS or other places. So you keep taking it till you pass if you want. Or you end up becoming agents, or you find some way to be related to the medical profession. The last slide, please. So the last thing I want to talk about is how it all ties up this year with the FMGE and a pandemic year. I recently did a piece for the South China Morning Post about a group of students who had made a petition to the Medical Council of India, asking that the pass percentage be reduced. So right now, it's a 300 question multiple choice exam. You just have to get 150, you pass, and you can practice medicine in India. What they were asking for is, why not reduce that to 30%? Can we just make it a lower figure so more of us can pass and be more useful during a pandemic year? So there are actually thousands of students currently in India sitting at home because they're unable to clear the FMGE. This particular image is from Jaipur. There were images I saw from Manipur, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Delhi. So this has, in the last few months, actually become a political issue, even with lots of politicians getting behind many of these students, appealing to the central government, allowing some kind of relaxation, perhaps for a pandemic year. This doesn't mean there's not been, I think what Madhu spoke about briefly about reforms, there has been reforms along the way, but the FMT is one big question that students are really saying, I think there needs to be a relook. And as Professor Baru will talk about, I hope during the discussion, this idea of an exit exam that everybody universally, whether you're a foreign graduate or a graduate from an Indian government or private university, should be asked to take at the end of it to qualify to be a doctor. Because the question often is, by bringing down the pass percentage, what about the quality? But like we can argue, what about the quality of private medical education in India either? So I would hope for that to be a discussion that we can talk about after this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You have brought a lot of social issues and social life as part of the academic life. Thank you very much for that. Friends, it was really a treat, in the sense that although there were 3 speakers, there was a consistent flow of ideas, very much integrated and interlinked, and thank you very much for whatever arrangement that you made to make a presentation like this. That is very good. Basically, when 3 people are presenting, you will find that there will be discontinuities. What I noticed is that was totally absent. Surprisingly, it was absent, and it's a very, very good sign. And I also feel that these issues related to the 3 dimensions that you have covered. One, who are the people going to China for studies in medicine? It is very clear that it is not the upper middle class and upper class. It is the lower middle class people who are going and who cleared NEET, but at the same time could not get into any of the reputed colleges or medical colleges within India. So that's a category of people who are basically going to China for medical studies. And the problems that they face there, that is also academic problems, and not only the social problems that Soumya highlighted, but also the academic problems. Language difficulty is one of the major difficulties. What is happening is that many of the students who are going to China and coming back, they do not feel, or the market does not feel, that they are internationally returned students coming from after international studies. That reduces the premium that is enjoyed by the international students in the labor market. That is one problem when they try to enter into the labor market. And another problem is that many of them do not qualify for a large share. Only 12 to 13% of the students who are having medical degrees from China are in a position to clear the foreign medical graduate examinations when they come back to India. This is a major challenge. In fact, most of the students going to China, they had 2 types of preparations. While in India, they prepare for NEET to get qualified for the NEET. Then, while in China, they are preparing for getting not only the degrees that they are studying for, but getting their pass percentages when they return the foreign medical examination. How do they pass? So this is a very interesting phenomenon. On both occasions, they are doubly burdened, not only the coursework studies, but also the work studies, the other one. But one question that you find is that, and also the social life, that is very clearly, especially some of the pictures that you have shown, Soumya, were quite revealing and quite interesting. But one question that comes is that, how do they realize the investment that they make? And I think one of the slides that Professor Rama showed is very revealing. That is true too, especially at least in most of the states, it is the dowry. If you happen to be a male, the investment can be realized easily. But if you happen to be a female, I do not know to what extent this investment can be realized with adequate returns. Mostly what is happening is that you are a foreign trained person. Whether you are trained or you have given the license to practice medical education in India is a different question. But you arrange a marriage so that if you have made 20 or 25 lakhs expenditure, you recover that, that's the way that it is. That is very clearly shown by the interview that you had, perhaps in Kerala, I don't remember exactly. So that is a very, very interesting way of looking at the education. Friends, what I'll try to do is that I will take another 5 minutes to put this in the broader context of student mobility, the whole world, the student mobilities, before I open it for discussions. I think one of the issues that we find is that why student mobility or a foreign degree is important. For a reason, the main important reason is that a foreign degree is valued very high and given a high premium in the developing countries in the labor market. So for example, if you have a foreign degree from United States or UK or Australia, you have a higher premium and better probability of getting a higher paid job in India. But unfortunately, a foreign degree has less premium in the developed country. They will prefer a graduate from their own universities, whether it is UK, USA, or any other place. This is a trap. In both places, what you find is that a foreign degree has a premium. Unfortunately, when you come to a degree from China to India, they do not fall under this paradigm. Or when a student is coming to India and going back, they do not fall under this paradigm. When a student is coming to India, they have an advantage. Many students who are coming for education in India, they are also getting socialized to English language. So that becomes a route for them to get into the Western world. Somebody who is coming from Nepal, because we are the largest number of students coming from Nepal. Students coming from Nepal or Bangladesh or any Sri Lanka, many of these countries where English is not the medium of instruction, After the independence, they have changed to the national languages. So coming to India is a preparatory stage for them, not only a degree. If they say that they had an undergraduate degree or a master's degree from India, the people, those who are recruiting or as a student will consider that these people will be able to speak and understand English. I was the director of programs in IEEP, International Institute of Education Planning. So when we recruit students, one of the things that we used to do is that I will ask my secretary to speak to them in English, because my secretary was British, So we wanted to know that the student will be able to understand English once we request the student to come, So when you have a degree from India, there is another non-market benefit that one is getting. But let me say that going abroad for studies is an important dimension. And if you see that, if you talk about the total diaspora, so there is a voluntary movement and involuntary movement from countries. And if you look into the diaspora, China has the largest diaspora of around 45 million. India has around 32 million. That includes the people of Indian origin and also the NRIs, non-resident Indians. If you put together 14 plus 17, it comes to around 31 million. So that is one group of people. What we find is that from the last 20 or 25 years, a new trend that we find is that people are moving. Previously, say for example, the developed countries tries to invite people to be employed. That means their education will be in the developing country and their employment will be in the developed country. Now that trend is changing. If you see H-1B visa, when we say that 80% of the or 60% of the H-1B visa is available for Indians who are getting this visa are also having a degree from some of the developed countries. So there is a preferential treatment that is given to a degree from that. This was not the case in the migration patterns earlier. Migration, it was a finished product. Highly qualified persons used to migrate from India in the 1960s and 70s. But now over a period of time, this has changed. And the change is that if you go as a student to the developed country, the chances are that you will not return. This has two aspects to this type of mobility, student mobility. One is that there is a route that is called as high cost, high return path. That is the path that Indians follow. That's the path the Chinese students follow when they go to USA, UK, etc. Say for example, 44 to 45% of the Indian students are going to USA and 15% to Australia. Around more than 70% of the students are going to 3 English-speaking countries. Whereas if you look into Chinese, you will find that a good share of students from China are going to Australia, followed by USA and then UK. So that is the pattern that you find, In all these cases, what you find is that the investment is very high, but the returns are also high. The returns are high because the students are more interested in the post-study visa, not the visa to study. There's a difference. That is because in China, when students are going, they are looking for the visa to study, not the post-study visa. But when they go to the other countries, they are looking for the post-study visa. And even when you say that, your report also indicates, or 50 lakhs rupees per year of education in a university, in a top-ranking university in USA, if you get a job for 5 years or 6 years to stay with the exchange rate in favor of India, you will find that you will recover the cost. Not only that, when you come back to India, you will get a very respectable job at a very high salary. So there are opportunities to recover the cost with profits, with benefits, with surpluses. That is one track. But I feel that countries like India and China, when they attract the students, say for example, China sends nearly 1 million students abroad for studies, but it receives only less number of students. It's only around 13 to 14% of the students that they send out are coming to China for studies. India sends around more than 3.5 or 3.1 lakh students abroad, but we get only 47,000 students to India. And most of the students who are coming to India is from the South Asian continent, South Asian countries, led by Nepal, So that is the way that we find this. This is a low cost, low return cycle. So I think I would classify these mobility patterns between India and China belonging to a category of low cost, low return. And whereas our westward looking education is high cost, high return, So that is the way that one has to look at it, because a large share of the students who are coming back from China or similar countries, whether it is Bangladesh or any other country, the experience is the same. The only difference is that they need not, some of them need not have to pass a test if you are qualifying your examination or qualifying your medical education from some of the countries, mostly developed countries. Otherwise, you face this difficulty. So that is one of the reasons why it is very important to see that, So let me end by saying that, see, there are two dimensions. One is that we sell human capital. That is why we are going abroad. The earlier migration patterns were that you studied in India, in IITs and the best institutions in India, you are taken away by the developed countries, and you went and sold your human capital with no investment. Because your investment was in India. At that time, higher education was highly subsidized. So the government was spending. So you had no investment and high returns. This used to be the model that was operating in the 1960s and 70s in India. Then you find that there is a change that is taking place. The fellowships remain the same or declined. And most of the student study abroad is funded by the households now. And then it became an upper class phenomenon, not the academic performance, but an upper class phenomenon. Even if you're academically very good, if you do not have money, sufficient resources, you cannot go. So what you find is that you are going to gain human capital, because you know that these gains can be sold at a higher price than what you can get in India. So there are two patterns that you find of the mobility pattern of students and those who are educated. This is one pattern. Unfortunately, when we go to China, or the students come to India, I treat them similar. They are mostly for soft power, to show their global presence, and more for diplomatic things. So they cannot be treated in the same context of market-mediated globalization process of higher education, where rate of returns become one of the major concerns and one of the incentives for investing in this type of education. So my request is that we have to see this apart from the hardcore evidence that you presented and the analysis that you provided, and also the argument that you developed. There is a broader area in the context of marketization of higher education and higher education becoming a commodity to be traded, and prices and profit become the major concerns, So let me say that even when I talk about these 4 forms of mobility of programs, or mobility of students, or mobility of institutions, and teachers, I don't get into this category. These 3 forms of mobility, one should not make any mistake. Money flows only in one direction. Programs follow, MOOCs and other programs follow from the developed country to the developing country. Students move from the developing country to the developed world. Institutions move from the developed country to the developing country, but money flows only in one direction. That is from the developing country to the developed country. This is a different type of circulation, mediated and negotiated through the market, and education becomes an instrument in the context of globalization to maximize this flow and to maximize the profitability of this sector. So this is something that I want to emphasize that, in the context of student mobility, it is important to make this distinction between, as a part of globalization, as a part of market process, the movement that is taking place, the mobility that is taking place, the profit maximization becomes one of the major criteria, like in any other market processes. And the other form of mobility, which is more related to, like when India says that we'll be giving 50,000 scholarships to the students to come and study in India. Still, we are not getting students. What does that mean? To play more important global role for India, to extend our diplomatic relationships. These are the type of things that the market logic will not work here. It is another logic that is working. So my request is that this mobility, the study that you have studied, you have very well done an excellent analysis that also can be seen from the different forms of mobility, because the Chinese students going abroad, as I mentioned, follows one logic and one market principle. When the students come to China, they follow different logic. This is very similar to the students going abroad from India and coming to India. I want to stop here. I should not take more time because I am given 10 minutes. I have not exceeded that time. So I want to keep it open for discussions. That is what you told me. We'll be having some discussions. I was told that you can, of course, identify yourself and ask for this. And let me check the chat. Some questions which are coming in the chat. If anybody wants to ask the questions through chat, that is fine. But if anybody wants to ask in person through the webinar web process, you are most welcome. Anybody who wants to ask a question, please identify yourself and post the question. Professor Rama, till what time we can go?
I think we can go on to what time?
Sorry?
Another 20 minutes, I think.
Okay, all right. Fine. Please, any questions?
I think in the chat box,
Yeah, there are quite a few.
Subha has asked a question.
Uh-huh.
Are any Indian doctors trained in Chinese medical universities immigrate to the West? Do they have to sit for license exams there? What we found through our study is that if you're an Indian doctor trained in a Chinese medical university, you have to write the qualifying exam in the West to get admission. So it is not an automatic admission to any Western university because they have their own entrance requirements. And so therefore, they have to go through another formal process of another exam before they can move to a Western university. And they find that it is not very easy. We did meet 2 or 3 students who are trying, aspirants to write the exam to enter a medical college in the US, but the proportion of that was very, very small. Madhu, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just taking from where you ended, there were quite a few who actually said that they would be going back to the Middle East, because some students from Wuhan were actually coming from the Middle East. It was the students from Kerala origin, but born and brought up in Saudi Arabia and the other countries. So they said they would be going back there and pursuing their post-graduation. And also some of those who would be going to Germany and US. So they would have had to, they will have to give the exams to enter their medical system. And also some of the students who want to enter the Chinese medical system, I mean, that obviously there are very few who have done it. There are actually negligible number who have entered the Chinese medical system. So again, the language is something that becomes important because you have to crack the exam in the Chinese language. So that has been the barrier as to why these students haven't continued in China.
You know, an interesting phenomenon that you find among the nurses, not among the doctors, is that, you know, if previously a lot of ANC nurses, auxiliary nursing certificate, you know, they used to migrate mostly to the Gulf countries. But now their demand in the Gulf countries have declined down. Over a period of time, you have to do at least BSc nursing. But normally you find that many, those who completed nursing, after 1 or 2 years of experience in India, they move to a Gulf country. And when they move to a Gulf country, if they are lucky to get into a multinational corporation by UK, USA or Australia, they work in the hospital there and their final destination is Canada, USA, UK or Australia. And within 6, 7, 8 years, what you find is that they compensate, they do not appear for an examination. Rather than appearing for an examination, they compensate this and finally they reach. Their destination is Australia, Canada, USA or UK. But the route is that from India, some experience of 1 or 2 years, then you go to a multinational corporation or you go to a Gulf country, work there for 1 or 2 years, then you get into a multinational hospital type of things. And then you branch off and reach your final destination. So it takes around 7 to 8 years for you to reach the destination after your studies, you know. That's the way that, so they bypass the examination. But for doctors, that is not a route.
If I can make a quick comment, Professor Varghese, from my limited reporting, I also found that parents also have an opinion of what happens to students after. So that Rashi Patel, who I spoke to in my piece, her father was very clear that she's going to go straight to the US because he was a doctor himself and didn't think that there was enough of a you know, in terms of how much you can earn as a doctor in India, it's not very conducive and she'll be better off elsewhere. So there was also pressure on where you go based on also gender. I think in her case as a woman, her parents felt very strongly that she should have an opportunity elsewhere than India. So just one of the anecdotes I thought.
No, but that's a very important piece of information, you know,
Yeah.
that gives an insight into very many other social connects that we have in India, you know.
There's a question from Ms. Ramanathan and Pondicherry. Now, as per new policy, both Indian and foreign students have to appear for qualifying exam. I'm taking this question because of the EFMG question. There is today no qualifying exam for an Indian student, but there is only a qualifying exam to practice for a foreign medical graduate. And this is the point that Soumya actually ended with. And I think all three of us are on the same page when we say why this uneven treatment between those who finish their medical education from a private medical college in India or even a government medical college and foreign medical graduate. I think there has to be a level playing field because it's not as if the quality of medical education in India, both across public and private sector is very even. It's not. So, but when this idea was actually put forward as policy, there was a lot of resistance from the Indian Medical Association saying that this is not fair and that should not be done. But I think if you want to bring any reform into medical practice, you have to introduce an exit exam, like many countries do. Like many of the Western countries have a qualifying exam. It's not as if the moment you pass out of your medical college, you can get absorbed. So I think this should be a very, very important reform. Then you have open it up. And my suspicion is that the low percentage you may see among the Chinese return will be as low even among some of our graduates from the Indian Medical College. And more importantly, I think the issue of the quality of the education then gets into a wider realm for debate rather than just restricting. And also to revise. In fact, when I talk to some doctors, they tell me that the EFMG is a particularly difficult exam. And I think it is kept particularly difficult in order to keep out foreign medical graduates from entering the system. I mean, this is just my reading of the situation. So how do you control the market supply, you know?
Let me add a footnote to that in the context of the new policy. That's the next question. See, there are three dimensions that are important. One, the new policy considers foreign institutions to come and establish branch campuses in India. This was not permitted. That is one dimension. The second dimension is that we are in a stage where we are going to ratify the Global Convention of Qualifications. And the UNESCO General Conference was passed this resolution where India was a party to that. And India was also a party to the drafting committee of this convention. And that was in November 2019. That means last year, the General Conference. What does it mean? This will have an equivalency arrangement. So for example, not only in medical education, anybody who comes from with a degree from many of the developing countries, today Association of Indian Universities provides an equivalency. But this equivalency is provided not with an assessment. It is provided without an assessment. What this convention will try to do, once India ratifies it, what will happen is that it will take into account equivalence based on an assessment that is to be done. If that assessment is done, that will be a general assessment. Then this examination specific to the Chinese students coming from China, etc., may eventually disappear. That is one part. The second is that there is also, we have National Skill Qualification Framework that is developed in 2013. Now we are in the process of developing National Higher Education Qualification Framework. Now this National Higher Education Qualification Framework is coming. Then certainly you will find that another way of aligning with this equivalence, that will happen. A third dimension is that Tokyo Convention, we have not yet ratified, although Tokyo Convention took place in 2012. But once these conventions are ratified, I don't think that the government of India will have any option but to ratify it. And when we say it is to be ratified, we are also in a process of setting up institutions which will support facilitate this mobility of students and teachers, etc. And this will be the next direction in which change will take place. It may not happen immediately, but my feeling is that over a period of time, this equivalency certification by the Global Convention will take over this foreign medical degree examination, graduate examination that you're talking about over a period of time. This is my expectation. I have no empirical basis to make this statement. I'm just speculating based on the policy parameters and the framework that you're talking about.
There's a question from Professor Madhavi Thampi and Ambassador Kant. Madhavi ma'am's question is there a limit on the number of times one can appear for the FMGE exam? And do you have any idea what the majority of those who haven't cleared the exam do while they are waiting to pass the exam? I think there is no limit for the FMGE exam because the number of students that we had interviewed, they said that a lot of them were giving it for, their seniors had been giving it for 4 years, and you have the FMGE twice a year, in June and in December. So as of now, there's no limit that's there in the FMG. So there are multiple attempts that these students keep giving. In between clearing the exam, actually, there's some of the students in Kerala, they told us that they do join the private hospital. They do join the private hospitals, smaller private hospitals through their own contacts and some familiar people that they know. So they do intern there, or they are junior doctors helping out and learning also in the process. Many of them said like they would prefer if the internship is done in India because that would in the sense like give them a better exposure to the practicalities of how to deal with patients, because that's something that was missing in China for them. So they wanted the supervised internship in India, and they suggested that if we could convey that to the policymakers. So, and that also depends on the state, individual states. So Kerala, I think, has a policy where they have put into place internships for foreign medical graduates. They can come and do the internships, but not all states have this particular policy instated.
Can I
Rama,
add
do you want to add anything? Yeah,
Yes.
Soumya, yeah.
Also to address Roya's question on why there's such a low passing rate, it's similar to what Madhu just pointed out, that the syllabus itself is actually quite varied. You are actually studying for two separate things simultaneously, but also many people said that if you are interning in an Indian hospital, it's very different. They find the nature of the exam at the PG level. One anecdote which is very interesting for me this year was actually the exam got postponed from June. It was postponed to August 31st. And the number of medical students who called me afterwards, distraught entirely, that this is the first time they've seen an exam that is nothing like before. In the entire history of the FMG, they claim August 31st exam was the toughest. And the reason being that while previously it's a quick, what do you know, sort of knowledge-based assessment, this was a proper case study. So you had to actually study a case for about a minute, and then it was more of a specialized exam, they claimed. It was not just the students, but those who coached them, senior doctors. If you looked at Facebook groups around this, there was a massive sort of essays written about how difficult the exam was this year. So it is an interesting sort of, maybe this is something that we can also look at in the future on like how the FMGE has changed over the years and what the questions have been. Again, I don't think there are any limits, Professor Thampi. There was a person from Calcutta who took the exam who told me that in his center, he actually saw much older men and women with children and wives who had come along waiting for them to write the exam. So you are looking at several years where you're constantly trying to get a qualification to practice medicine in India.
I think there are a couple more questions, but I saw Patricia raise her hand. Can we have Patricia?
Please ask her to identify herself and then.
Yes, I'm Patricia Oberoi. I've read the original paper very carefully and appreciated it a great deal as a social scientist, and particularly the interview data I found very moving, as I did now Soumya's account. And in the present framing with inputs from Professor Verghese and from Soumya with the visuals, I think it's come off very well. I had one concrete little question and one comment. Concrete question is, what about Indian students going for Chinese medical education? A lot of people being educated in Chinese medicine go to China. Have you any idea about how that works, how it's dealt with, how it's integrated, what happens to them? Is that a project for the future or not at all? I remember one of the doctors of the Kotnis expedition actually made a future for himself in Chinese medicine. And there must be many other practitioners as well. The second thing is that there's a lot of possibility and potentiality going forward in the areas that Professor Verghese commended, but also for the purposes of comparative study. One is how do India and China compare as destinations, perhaps for foreign foreigners coming for medical education. How are we doing? How are they doing? And how are the soft power aspects of these working out or not working out, if that is one of their aspects? The other thing is that another comparative dimension, and certainly would be quite meaningful, is to look at the students from other countries studying in doing medical education in China and how they do. First of all, there are a lot of South Asians that you've all come across from Nepal, presumably also Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and so on. and India, that would be a very good thing to be looking at. Or even from other parts of the developing world, if you like, from Africa. So one could see the possibility of a sort of much bigger project, imagination of a project about foreign medical students in China and how they, what happens to them also when they return to their home countries. So we have partnerships with people working in Africa. What about the students there? So many African students used to study in medicine in India. I don't know whether that's still the case. Professor Verghese can tell us. So sort of saying just a suggestion that not only along the lines you've already explored, but going further, I think this is a very rich mine that you've dug into, and congratulations on that.
Thank you, Patricia. As far as Indian students in Chinese medicine, we didn't explore that. But in their training, the Indian students, even in the international stream, were given some exposure to TCM. But it wasn't a major part of their study, but they did get some introduction to TCM. But we didn't explore the Chinese curriculum because the international curriculum is different from the Chinese curriculum. And that is
very important.
Yeah.
It's a very important point, Professor Rama. Sorry for intervening for half a minute. No, it's very important because, when somebody is going to Oxford, all the students follow the same curriculum.
Exactly.
And when somebody is going to any Australian university or any other university, all of them follow the same curriculum. But when a student who is going to China, it is not totally different, but not exactly the same curriculum.
Yeah.
And also language is also another issue which you highlighted in your study. They use mostly PPTs, PowerPoints, and the language competency of the teachers itself is slightly limited. And as a result of that, the explanation and exploration possibilities that the Indian students or any other foreign student who is not well versed in Chinese language finds a lot of difficulty. So, for example, a foreign student comes to India, everybody follows the same course, and the language of instruction is the same.
Yeah.
So it is very different. Okay,
Yeah.
Please, sorry for the intervention.
The other thing I wanted to add is that the interviews we had with the students on curriculum and pedagogy, they were very clear that the depth and the intensity of the training of the Chinese curriculum is very different from the international curriculum.
Yes.
So there is an issue there as well. I think Ashok Kant the director had a question on post-COVID. What will happen to medical education, travel for medical education to China during the post-COVID period? Would you like to take that up, Soumya?
But you visited Wuhan, no?
Yes,
you
we were in the epicenter.
You will be the authority to share your experiences, Please go ahead.
Soumya?
Yeah, so there are several waiting for some news. September 1st, the Indian Embassy in Beijing put out a notice on their website saying students are not allowed back as yet, so to please wait. So to be honest, there are a lot of students entirely in limbo right now. Those who are, in fact, those who have finished their internship and are just about to graduate have not been able to go back to get their certificates. And the other point about the FMG is even if you crack the FMG, you need a graduation certificate to practice. So there is a bunch of people just waiting for some kind of word on how things can change. However, I have heard of discrimination in India against them as well. They are, many of them are called derogatory terms as well. Why did you go to China? You're not of good quality as a doctor. So there's a lot of issues of personal attacks as well. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a bad time to even suggest going across. And for many of us who might want to do research or journalism there, it's like the same as many professionals who are waiting to get a visa to return. So it's entirely on, at this point, I would see the numbers might reduce. We see about 7,000 to 8,000 students going across every year. I do see a post-COVID world where that sharply declines. Still, things are much better between the two countries, but I see that that might go to Russia or Kazakhstan or other places, but China might, like we pointed out in the presentation, that some of the recruiters or like agents have also dropped China off their list. So there could be a situation where we see a massive decline in the number of students going across.
No, but are you talking about the effect of COVID, or are you talking in general?
Both, sir. I would say COVID plus border tensions both play a role in how they are perceived at the moment. COVID for sure in terms of travel restrictions. That
Yes,
might
that is true. That is
be
true.
linked to border tensions at all. I don't think there's anything official from anywhere about the border tensions playing a role in like mobility of students. But COVID specifically, my colleagues and contacts there seem to think that this year there is no option of going back. So anything might be only in the new year, if there is any word.
But you know, if anybody can, I have Professor Rama and also Madhurima. See, I have one doubt about one issue, that most of the students going to China are from Gujarat, Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, etc. And if you see the growth of private higher education institutions, especially technical and medical, and if you see medical, it is the western part. And if you see technical, it is Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, undivided Andhra Pradesh, or Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, etc. So it will be very interesting to see that how the growth, the concentration of private higher education institutions, especially in the technical profession in India, is related to the migration pattern. Perhaps it produces a social compulsion for people to do engineering, people to do medical, and when they do not get an opportunity to do it in India, then apart from other factors, there may be a more compulsion for them. A person from UP, Uttar Pradesh, or from Orissa, or from Rajasthan may not be having that pressure, So when I saw that, this migration is mostly from Western and Southern India. And when I was looking at the concentration of higher education institutions, I find that there is some correlation between these two. How spurious or realistic it is, I do not know.
And one other thing I want to just point out, taking on from what Soumya said, you see, it has occurred to me that firstly, there is already investment made by the Indian students who have gone abroad, right? But given their class background, their ability to present their case and bring some pressure on not only the Indian government, but even the diplomatic community. You see, if the diplomatic community was having this, rather their children had this crisis, their children go to the West, they don't go to China to study. Now, this would become a policy concern, right? Because the pressure group would ensure that their interests are protected, their children's interests are protected. But these people who are moving from these various states, the particular case of Kamlesh really struck me. He had political connections in Tamil Nadu, but they're all regional political connections. He's not part of Lutyens' Delhi or the power elite. Now, the point really I'm trying to make is the constituency which is moving in terms of the class character of this group has no political or any other social or cultural capital for them to get visible. They're not really. So tomorrow, if you say the government takes an arbitrary action and says we will stop students traveling to China to study medical education, there is no voice for them. But tomorrow, if you say I'll stop students from going to the United States, well, Trump says we don't want Indian students, I think our elite will be distressed. Like we were, we can't travel during the time of COVID. We couldn't jump into an airplane and be globalized. It'd be very similar. So I think we need to understand that how we look at the so-called poor quality of Chinese medical education. You're not worried about the poor quality of Indian private education or public sector education either. So I really want to bring this class dimension, because I think the bureaucracy and the political class today is not really concerned about the likes of the, public people who want to access public education or even move to these countries in order to enhance their own social status and build their soft power.
You are absolutely.
I just want to raise this as a
no. But it is not a question of raising this. Absolutely right. Because let me share one of the experiences. I was part of a delegation which went to UK, and we went to the House of Commons. Out of the 2 hours meeting, 2 hour long meeting, the first question that is asked to us was, do you recognize 1 year master's degree that is awarded by the UK universities? Because many UK universities started providing 1 year, or USA too, 1 year master's degree, because the cost will come down like anything, and you have a degree from Oxford or any the reputed universities which you can cash on. And unfortunately in India, if somebody wants to become a lecturer, we will not be able to give a lecturer's post unless one completes 2 years. So what I mean to say is that immediately, since the class character or class origins are different of those people who are going and getting these degrees, investing heavily, different. So it has a capacity to exert political influence. And even when you are talking about the recognition of degrees, the convention that I am talking about, one of the dimensions that we discussed, I was party to the discussions in Paris in October 2019, in the initial draft discussions. One of the points that they discussed is that this type of degrees, short duration degrees, duration should not be the basis to analyze the quality of the degrees, and these type of degrees should be giving recognition like any other 2 year or 2.5 year degrees. So you are absolutely right. It is the class character of the students who are attending these classes in China and these classes in UK or USA that makes substantial difference, and they exert a political influence which can turn into a decision by the government. If there are no questions, can we call it a day?
Yes.
That's
I
okay.
think we can conclude. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, thanks to all the 3 panelists. Thank you very much. It was a very good presentations, as I mentioned in the beginning of my opening remarks. It was a very consistent presentation and issues, and the mix between the academic dimensions that you talked about and what Soumya contributed to the social life. I think I really enjoyed these combinations. It is not only just an academic life of students and academic orientations, but also their social life. How do they get socialized? The message that we get is that their degree, not only the degree is slightly devalued, but also their life is also, they are mostly interacting with it. That is what I learned from Soumya's presentation. They interact with the groups within the Indian students, and their socialization with even Chinese or Chinese culture, etc., are rather limited. One of the reasons may be language. The language may not permit you to go to the markets. Language may not be permitting you to go for some of the cultural programs because you will not be able to understand, etc. So it makes a lot of difference. And among the Chinese cities also, you find that if you go to Shanghai, Shanghai is more international than many other cities. So you find that, you can communicate, you find a lot of people speaking English, even Chinese, speaking English. In the restaurants also, you will find that, Chinese restaurant, but rather a mix of people are coming, etc. So the socialization process, that is also a very important dimension when you say that, somebody is graduating from a particular university. And there's a labeling process that is involved in the degree. So there is a signaling process and there is a labeling process with the higher education. I think Chinese higher education, the students who are going from in India, even when they are in cognitive dimensions, even if they are equal to the medical graduates from other places, but in terms of the labeling function that these universities are trying to do, it is very poor. It is not accepted by the market. So on the other hand, what you find is that the top ranking university in Asia is in China. Peking University is number 22 in the global ranking. It's the top ranking universities. And if you take the BRICS countries, out of the 10 top ranking universities in the BRIC countries, 6 are in China. So what I mean, but the branding is that, and I think also that, Indians also need to change the perception that we have, the bias and the perception that we have, anything that is Western is excellent. And if anything that is Eastern is inferior to that, I mean, that also we had to change over a period of time. I think we'll be able to change. But one trend that we find is that China is one of the few countries which has gone very steep and high in terms of their rankings, international rankings, global rankings. And I am sure that the rush for foreign degree in China will come down. The Chinese students going abroad, because the quality of education within the Chinese setup is improving. Once the quality is improving, and that degree is almost valued at par with the degree that you are getting from abroad, then you'll find that the craze to go abroad, will be an issue. That will be that craze will be coming down. That is what I feel. It was very interesting expose, and moreover, when we discuss about internationalization, I attend many seminars, sometimes make presentations, and I also have some papers. But in all these cases, the type of issues that you highlighted are not coming prominently. It is more generalized issues, but the advantage that I find is that the empirical evidence that you generated and also the personal interviews that you held, that has given a different type of insight. That's why I always say that, I again repeat that, what Soumya presented, adds very well with your strong empirical academic dimensions. And that gives a very, very complete picture of the whole issue. Thank you very much to each one of you, and also to the Chinese Center for organizing this.